Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this webinar presentation. We are the Defense Systems Information Analysis Center, or DSIAC, one of 3 IAC domains in the DoD Information Analysis Centers operating under the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC, within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Our informative webinar series highlights current and emerging research and technology developments. It presents an opportunity for accelerating the DoD's leverage of these advancements by increasing awareness and fostering technical collaboration. DSIAC serves as one of the premier information research partners and curators of technology advancements and trends for the defense systems community. As such, our organization supports those working in the defense systems domain of DoD research and engineering. We do so by helping navigate the vast landscape of scientific and technical information, allowing our customers to get a head start on their technical projects. With an understanding of the defense system's DoD research and engineering landscape, we provide research and analysis services. We help unlock access to information, knowledge, and best practices from government, industry, and academia to stimulate innovation, foster collaboration, and eliminate redundancy. We hope you enjoy this webinar presentation and that it serves as a catalyst for community collaboration and improved DoD defense systems research.
Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you might be joining us from. My name is Brian Benish with DSIAC, the Defense Systems Information Analysis Center. Hopefully you enjoyed our brief little intro video advertisement that we got there. And gave you a quick introduction to who we are and what we do and to why we are hosting this webinar, and are pleased to have Andrew here to deliver this presentation. A few bits of housekeeping before we get going. If you have any technical difficulties at any time during this presentation, first rest assured we are recording it, so it will be available at a later date, and you can watch it at your leisure. But if you are having any issues with the video portion of this, the slides are available for download directly from the DSIAC website. If you go to dsiac.org, find the webinar, the webpage for this particular webinar, there's a link to download the slides, and you can always dial in by phone and follow along that way. For those who are in the AnyMeeting platform here, you can submit any questions during the presentation, and I would encourage you to do so. To submit a question, there should be a little icon, chat icon, sort of in the top middle of your screen, where you can click Add a New Question and get that one in. Once at the end of the presentation, we'll be doing a little Q&A portion, so I'll help moderate that, and Andrew will respond to your questions in the order that they are received. So again, anytime during the presentation, click that little button, add your question, and get that in queue. I do want to distinguish that from the chat. On the left-hand side of your screen, if you are in the AnyMeeting platform, is a chat that we will monitor that in case you errantly put your question in there, but that's intended just for chat between participants and such. Questions you would like to ask Andrew, again, please submit in that question portal that you should find from the top middle of your screen. I think that about covers the introductory portions. If you do have any other questions, again, my name is Brian Benish. You can get a hold of me. Hopefully you can find my email online somewhere. Worst case scenario, I would recommend our contact alias, contact@dsiac.org. That goes to a bunch of us, real people who will actually get back to you, and I will likely be one of those people. So if you have any issues, just get in touch with us that way. That all aside, I will want to hand the balance of the time over to Andrew for the presentation, and I will chime back in towards the end. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, Brian, and thank you everyone on this call for joining us. So as Brian mentioned, I'm Andrew Rosenberger. I'm from the Ceramic and Transparent Materials branch at the CC DevCom Army Research Laboratory. And today I'll be talking about our research into advanced manufacturing for the pursuit of heterogeneous ceramic design. So the main thrust of our research here, what we're trying to go for, is to protect our greatest asset, which is the soldier. And the primary mechanism by which we do that is through the various forms of body armor, helmets, helmets, armor plates, and various things, which can turn what would be normally fatal wounds into still significant and very nasty bruises, but very survivable ones compared to having a bullet actually go through one's body. And so soldier protection requires two things. It requires that you stop the threat from penetrating the armor and minimize the energy transfer to the soldier to minimize blunt force trauma. And it also requires that you don't overload the soldier with so much mass of armor that they're unable to move around or perform as they're expected to do. So there's always a bit of a balancing act between protection and burden, which leads into the three sort of different types of armor materials that we have on the right, which all have their different advantages and disadvantages between protection, weight, and cost. So at the top right, we have ultra-high weight molecular polyethylene, which is typically used in soldier helmets, which is a very light material, very low density, and provides a good level of protection against certain threats. Beneath that, we have ultra-high weight polyethylene or armored fiber vests and stuff, similar to what you might know of as Kevlar or Dyneema, which also provides a certain level of protection and has very low density. Then at the bottom right, we have what is the highest level of threat protection, which is a ceramic, typically boron carbide or silicon carbide strike face on an ultra-high weight molecular polyethylene backer. The ceramic here is really the critical part for advanced threat protection because it has a very hard and very strong surface, which is really excellent at ablating away the materials or the projectile and providing a high level of protection against high energetic threats, but comes at the cost of somewhat increased density over other materials. So when we look towards the future and at improving the armor materials that we have, there's sort of multiple approaches that we can take to enhancing ceramic armor performance, which is generally defined as the strength over the areal density. So how much performance you can get out of the least amount of mass per square inch of area. So one route is that you can try to improve the current state of the art materials, boron carbide or silicon carbide, by refining their microstructure and property. Oh, sorry, it seems that the slideshow ended here. Could someone bring that back up, please?
Yep, let me get that going just a minute here. There we go.
There we
Back
go.
on?
Thank you, Brian. Yep. Yeah, so as I was saying, one way we can do this is by improving the materials of the state-of-the-art materials that we have, namely boron carbide and silicon carbide, by doing things like refining the microstructure, controlling the grain boundary phases, and sintering mechanisms to maximize density, minimize grain growth, and enhance advantageous failure mechanisms such as transgranular or intergranular fracture inside the material to make it stronger. Or there's also a wide range of research into boron carbide and silicon carbide blends, which combine the two materials into a sort of stochastically mixed microstructure in order to improve their properties. Another potential route you could go is to develop or enable novel superhard and lightweight materials, which is a very difficult but theoretically possible route. Boron carbide is the third or fourth hardest material known to man, so it's hard to get to something that's significantly better than boron carbide. But things like diamond are out there, and if they could be incorporated into a ceramic armor, they could give you some potential property and performance improvements over the current materials we have now. Then the final route, which I'm going to be talking about today, is to invoke new or advanced defeat mechanisms in armor through design, which has a lot of synergy with additive manufacturing, which is a lot of the work that I'll be talking about today. Our overall vision here is to leverage ceramic design to enable novel armor mechanisms, not so much by creating new materials or just controlling the processing, but allowing us to push beyond conventional powder processing methods to open up the armor design space. So conventionally, when you mix two ceramic powders together, you're limited to doing things like stochastic powder mixing, which is where you take boron carbide and silicon carbide powders, mix them together at various different length scales of mixedness, and then hot press or pressurelessly sinter them into an armor plate. And so that limits you to things like what you see on the left, which is just a fine-grained boron carbide or silicon carbide microstructure, which is the dark phase inside a boron carbide or silicon carbide matrix. But what we want to do is to utilize advanced processing techniques like additive manufacturing to allow us to control how much and where we put each of the different materials that we design into our armor. That way we can do advanced things like create interface or texture engineering to control the failure propagation and the crack modes, do things like functional gradients, build in residual stresses into our microstructures, or create these sorts of laminated hierarchical microstructures, things like brick and mortar microstructures or nacre-like structures, which can advance the mechanical properties above what you can get just by stochastic mixing of one or two materials. So these are things that you can see, in nature and other composites work, where you have things like aligned and textured wood grains or mollusk shell, where things like the fracture toughness of the material are substantially higher than what you would get with unorganized microstructures. So we have three primary ceramic additive manufacturing methods at the Army Research Lab that we've been investigating. The first is material extrusion through direct inkwrite, which has a great ability to do multi-material printing for functionally graded parts, which we've used on our modified TAS Lulzbot printer in order to enable us to inline mix two or potentially more ceramic inks in order to create parts with a controlled level of silicon carbide and boron carbide in it. The second technique we use is vat polymerization or stereolithography printing, which is where you have a ceramic impregnated resin that you can cure into the shape of your part, which has a great build resolution and can create some very complex shapes, but is limited into mainly working with single materials and also has challenges around working with dark powders such as boron carbide and silicon carbide. Then the third technique, which we've just brought in-house and are only starting to work with, so I won't be talking about too much, is powder bed fusion or binder jetting, which is where you have a ceramic powder bed that you spray a binder over into the shape of your parts. So this is great for complex shapes and very scalable to industrial applications, but also has limitations with respect to working with multiple materials. So going in order, the workhorse of our direct inkwrite work has been this Lulzbot direct inkwrite system that was developed by Dr. Nicholas Koo and Joshua Pelz at University of California, San Diego. And what this is essentially a off-the-shelf fused filament fabrication printer that we've hacked and modified in order to work with aqueous ceramic ink suspensions that we developed ourselves in-house. So instead of the filament, we have two precise plunger-driven volumetric feed units that feed into an inline oger, which mixes the two inks at a ratio that is programmable within the software, and then extrudes it out into the parts as controlled by the design software inside the printer itself. So this is a fairly unique custom system that can co-print multiple materials with in situ composition control. It lets us control what shape of part we want to build, as well as how much of each portion of the part is boron carbide, silicon carbide, or a mixture of the two. So there's been a lot of external work that we've leveraged to optimize and design this printer. We've had a capstone project in collaboration with the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in order to design the ogers in order to maximize the mixedness of the two inks by maximizing the vorticity, which is the shear rate experienced by the inks inside the oger, and they've done some great work modeling the fluid vorticity, going through different designs of ogers that allow us to maximize the mixedness of these materials. More recently, we've also been doing a lot of work on in situ monitoring via pressure sensors of the pressures in the plungers, which has enabled us to allow for smoother material changes, reduce the print failures and material waste, and generally given us the ability to print more reliably and with fewer defects from nozzle clogging and other issues that we typically run into when running this system. So taking all those together, we can give you an overview of the AM process for direct ink write. So it really starts with the ceramic powder, which is a mixture of ceramic powder, polymer binder, dispersants acid, and water that we put through a high shear mixing process to create these smooth and well-mixed inks, roughly with a shear thinning behavior similar to peanut butter. So shear thinning means that at low shear rates, they have a high stiffness, which is great for when they are deposited and have to retain their shape. But at high shear rates, they're a very low viscosity, which is great when you're trying to do things like force them through tubes and extrude them from nozzles. On the bottom side, we have the design, which is where we start with a 3D model, typically an STL file, which is then converted into toolpath programming or G-code on the printer itself. And we have to do some custom incorporation of the composition information because there's limitations in the software's ability to deal with multiple materials within the same parts. So in this step, we have to manually go in there and insert the compositional information to the part in order to do things like functional gradients or discrete layers between boron carbide and silicon carbide. So once we have the inks ready and the designs, we put them together and actually print out our parts, which then follow a drying process to remove excess water from it, then a binder burnout step where we remove the polymer binder, leaving us with only ceramic powder, and then finally the high temperature sintering step where we convert basically a porous sort of sandy powder part into a fully dense ceramic component. So by using this system, we've demonstrated both printability and densification for a variety of different functionally graded or otherwise controlled ceramic substructures that aren't available through conventional manufacturing techniques. So we've shown our ability to create monolithic parts of a single material, continuous gradients where you have a silicon carbide material on the top going in graded steps to a fully boron carbide composition on the bottom. Hybrid steps where we go from one material to the other and back again. And then discrete elements where we have a discrete layers between things like boron carbide and silicon carbide in a sort of layered structure. And then we've been using hot pressing to densify these materials to full density. So you can see there's a pretty drastic change in volume as you get rid of the almost 50 volume percentage of pores in the green bodies and take them to fully dense ceramic parts. So when we've analyzed these parts using scanning electron microscopy and other techniques, we can see that we've been fairly successful in creating the controlled microstructures that we desire. So in our continuously graded parts on the left, you can see at the top on the silicon carbide portion, you have mainly silicon carbide, and then at the bottom you have mainly boron carbide. But we do have some issues with obtaining full mixedness between the materials, partially from agglomerates within the individual inks as well as during the mixing process. So you can see in the blown up microstructure image, you do get a good amount of microscale mixing between the individual boron carbide and silicon carbide grains, which are about a micron length scale. But you also have these large agglomerates of boron carbide and silicon carbide, which have not been fully broken up. On the discrete layers, you can see that we have a very sharp interface between the boron carbide and silicon carbide layers, but we can also note a lot of residual stress-induced cracking from the coefficient of thermal mismatch between boron carbide and silicon carbide during processing, which is undesirable in the final components because that will reduce the mechanical properties of it. So a lot of our current work is working on engineering these residual stresses in order to identify the design space we can work with and give us some ability to control the residual stresses within the material. So we've been doing modeling work using finite element modeling in order to take the geometries of the parts as well as the material properties in order to try to predict the residual stresses that will be produced during sintering, and then used Raman spectroscopy on hot pressed parts in order to see how well our models are matching up to the actual residual stresses that we see during sintering. So our end goal here is to give us the ability to design with residual stresses, so we can do things like introduce surface compression and crack resistance, as well as embedded compressive resistance to control how failure occurs in these materials during high impact events, and in order to give us improved performance that we're not able to realize through conventional processing. Going down a length scale now, I'm going to talk about some of our work with stereolithography, which is working at enabling ceramic texturing. So all the work we've been doing with direct ink writing is sort of at the tens to hundreds of microns to millimeter scale, where we're trying to control things using agglomerates of particles at really the half millimeter to the millimeter scale, where you have material A here and material B there. But what we can also do with additive manufacturing is control the texture and properties of the grains of the material itself, mainly through texturing. So our hypothesis here is that we can create ceramics with a higher fracture toughness from introducing a microstructural texture into it, which will produce enhanced ballistic properties. And so the way we've been doing that is by leveraging the shield fields that are available in many stereolithography printing techniques in order to take a ceramic ink with these alumina platelets in it that are seeded and shear align them during the additive manufacturing process in order to create a microstructural texture. So we've been using these illusion alumina platelets along with conventional alumina powder and mixing them with a Teflon Genesis photocurable resin base that's commercially available using the same high shear speed mixing techniques that we've been using for our direct ink writes to create the ceramic feedstock. We can then characterize its rheological properties and prototype tape cast it in-house using only small quantities before scaling it up to print the green part in collaboration with some of the folks up at Rutgers University who've been lending us their Admaflex 130 printing system, which is able to both shear align and print these parts. And finally, we sinter these via hot pressing or pressureless sintering, and characterize the microstructures and mechanical properties. What we've been able to demonstrate through this process is our ability to introduce microstructural texture at the length scale of about 1 to 10 microns, so a whole order of magnitude finer than the work we've been doing using direct ink writing, which has allowed us to create these sort of highly aligned, almost nacre-like microstructures that have a good level of microstructural toughening to them. However, there are also some limitations with this. In our initial results, we had strong alumina interfaces, which prevented the cracks from actually seeing this microstructural texture. So instead of diverting around the platelets in the microstructure, cracks would just go straight through that. So our current focus is twofold. It's on controlling the level of the microstructure itself, things like the grain size, the degree of texture, and the interfaces between them, as well as the grain boundaries by introducing dopants such as interfacial glasses to sort of weaken the grain boundaries between the alumina grains and promote cracks from going around the grains that's shown in the top right instead of going straight through them. We've also been working on using some additive manufacturing-enabled design of potential new energy mitigation microstructures. So in collaboration with some of the researchers up at University of Massachusetts Lowell and the University of Tennessee Knoxville, we've been able to print some of these ceramic resonator designs that they've been able to design to attenuate the incoming shock waves and redistribute the load in order to give us enhanced ballistic property. So this is where the enhanced build resolution from stereolithography comes in very handy, because it gives us a lot of design freedom in order to print out and then sinter these parts that will hopefully enable us to attenuate shock waves and give us yet another route in order to provide armor materials with superior performance. So to wrap up our talk, I know I've gone over a lot of things, but there are two kind of themes that we've been going over. One is giving ourselves the ability to manipulate ceramics at multiple different length scales in ways that we're unable to achieve through conventional processing. And the other is leveraging a wide range of partnerships and collaborations we have in industry, in academia, and with the Army Research Lab and the warfighter themselves in order to multiply our efforts here. So we've had a lot of very fruitful collaborations with folks at the University of Washington, the University of San Diego, the U.S. Military Academy with our groups here at ARL, as well as we've had a lot of good relationships with Rutgers and some of the additive manufacturing companies such as Lithos and EX1 and the University of Delaware. So moving forward by leveraging and collaborating with all these different actors, we hope to be able to deliver and continue to deliver advanced ceramic armor solutions for the warfighter needs. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any of questions that you have.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That was definitely a great presentation and gave a lot of stuff for folks to think about and ask some questions on, which are coming through. So let me go ahead and just open those up. All right. So first question that came in partway through the presentation was asking, is the boron carbide hexagonal or cubic?
So I don't believe it's either hexagonal or cubic. It has a different different lattice structure from both of those. It's got this fairly unique rhombohedral unit cell where it's got this basically 12 boron atoms surrounding a carbon one, so it's neither.
Okay. All right. Next question that came in was asking about your testing. So have you tested a hard rubber layer between two ceramic carbide blends or maybe polymer?
Yeah. So we haven't been looking at that sort of length scale. The problem with doing something like that is that you can't incorporate the rubber layer into the length scales that we're working with because it just wouldn't survive the sintering process. The sintering process is typically around 2000 degrees Celsius, so any sort of rubber or polymer is not going to survive that. Now, working upward, you could look into maybe making some thin boron carbide sheets and try to make some sort of composite. That would be sort of at an above length scale. And we'd be definitely interested to collaborate with folks on that sort of thing, but don't have the in-house capabilities to do that ourselves.
Okay, that makes sense. The next one. Next question says, when printing the ceramic materials using SLA, you mentioned you can align the platelets before photo curing. Would you please describe what the alignment process looks like and if it can be applied to other printing methods like direct inkwrite?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So the alignment process in the Admaflex that we've been simulating in our lab is essentially tape casting, which introduces a shear field into the ink as it is deposited out. And since the platelets are anisotropic, they will align with that shear field during the casting or print process, which will act as seeds for microstructural texture during grain growth during sintering. So it also could be applied to direct inkwrite and other methods, since whenever you compress the ink in things like Lithos' stereolithography printer, that also creates a shear field. Or when you extrude ink out of a nozzle, that also creates a shear field, which can be used to align anisotropic particles. So there's been some great work over at University of Tennessee, as well as Penn State and the Air Force Research Lab, on doing things like aligning ceramic or carbon fibers out of direct inkwrite nozzles in order to create composite parts using similar techniques to what we've been doing.
Okay. Good. Okay, next question is asking, is it possible yet via additive manufacturing to create functional gradients in a part that change orientation upon printing FGM ceramics so that the possibility of steering the energy or shock waves and directional or orientational control over microstructure from an impact event, has that ever been explored? And has this potential design approach been explored yet using M&S? Hopefully you got all that.
Yeah. I'm not sure what you mean by M&S there, but
I guess I would
yeah,
assume some sort of finite element, modeling in sim.
yeah. So I'm not entirely sure also what you mean by having parts that change orientation amongst printing the ceramic. So with the current tech, we can basically control how much of each material is present at each part of the part that we're printing out there. So, as you can imagine, that opens up a huge modeling and simulation design space to work with. You can do things above and beyond just having a simple gradient from boron carbide on the bottom to silicon carbide on the top. So that's a huge knowledge gap that we have in terms of how these different material fields and the consequent stress fields that'll be produced when you densify them would affect the ballistics of us, and how that would actually interact with the energy and shock waves. So we're developing the capabilities there, and we also need some help and support in developing the modeling and simulation designs to tell us what we need to print in order to maximize performance.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just piggyback on that a bit and ask if you know what sort of modeling and simulation tools, techniques are being used for these kind of events, especially impact events. I mean, you're getting pretty high impacts. Work as a finite element, LS Dyna kind of work, or something different.
Yeah, there's a good number of things that work out there. At the very basic level, the finite element modeling of just how the residual stress fields form during processing is needed, and then that needs to scale all the way up to full-scale ballistic simulations, and that develop a feedback loop between designs and performance.
Okay. All right. Well, Mike, if you want any clarification, go ahead and just toss another question, and we'll maybe bring it back. Moving on, next question is asking what the sintering temperature was, sintered under inert environment.
Yeah, so typically around 2,000 degrees C under argon or vacuum.
Easy enough. Next question, just simply asks, I'll take this one. Are the slides going to be available? The answer is yes. In fact, on the webinar webpage on DSIAC.org, you can click a link and grab them right now. So if you head there, and there's in the chat, I believe Sharon added a link to that, so you can grab it there. Next question says, it looks like hot press will be needed to achieve high density. However, it may also compress the printed 3D structures. Can you please comment on this?
Yep. Yeah, so that definitely occurs, and it's actually fairly straightforward to change the design of the printed part to account for shrinkage during hot pressing or other sintering techniques that we use. So we can do things like, if we know that it'll shrink about 50% in the z-axis when hot pressing, we can just build it 50% larger while printing.
Okay. That's accounted for. Next question, is there anything you do after binder burnout besides hot pressing to decrease the porosity? If not, is there any negative impact on the microstructure after hot pressing?
Yeah, so hot pressing is the main sintering technique that we've used to consolidate these, because when they're green, they're about 50% void, which, as you can imagine, has the mechanical properties of very well held together sand, which is not too impressive. So hot pressing is the primary method that we use just because it gets us the highest material properties and density with the least amount of pain involved, but we can also use pressureless sintering to try to consolidate these parts. Not sure what you mean by negative impact on the microstructure after hot pressing, but during the cool down from the hot pressing temperatures of 2,000-ish degrees C, boron carbide has one coefficient of thermal expansion, silicon carbide has another. So you can, depending on the composition, you can build up a very large residual stress between the two phases as they cool down and shrink differentially, which can cause cracking within the part, which is definitely detrimental.
Mm. Yeah, and we did just have a, comment come into the last question saying that using hot isostatic pressing, then the issue that was previously raised about compressing the printed 3D structures, that using hot isostatic pressing might alleviate that concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hipping works great as well. It's just hip machines are a bit more troublesome to get by, especially ones that go that hot.
Mm. Gotcha. All right, next question. Could any of the presented techniques be applied to GCV armor plates and or tactical wheeled vehicle transparent armor modules?
They definitely could. There's no reason that you couldn't scale these up from like soldier protection plates to ground combat vehicle or other armor materials.
Good question. Okay, and we got only one more in queue, which is just simply asking, have you done any ballistic testing of these, presumably these armor designs?
So not yet. We're currently working on trying to scale up some of these designs to the sizes that we need in order to conduct some ballistic testing. So hopefully in the next few years.
Okay, very good. Easy enough. All right, I'll go ahead and just blather on for a moment or two and see if there's any more questions that come in queue. But if not, Andrew, I really do appreciate your time. Appreciate everybody else's time joining in on this presentation, especially last minute, kind of announcing this. So thank you for all of you who are here. And again, the presentation will be available or the video of this presentation is already available on the website. If there are any questions that come through that you want Andrew to answer, I'm sure you can find his contact information and get in touch with him. Otherwise, I would encourage everyone to look at the DSIAC.org website. We have a technical inquiry service that we offer, where we will help answer any of your technical questions that might be on this topic or otherwise. So if you have a technical question related to this, Andrew might be one of the folks we go to and say, hey, they're looking for a response to this. Could you provide us something, and we can maybe get you all connected or get the answer to whatever question you might have. So encourage you to take a look at that and take advantage of that service. And otherwise, thank you all for the time. Andrew, thanks again.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, everyone. As you said, feel free to reach out to me in person if you have any more questions.
All right, very good. Well, have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.